Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I'd like to welcome you all to our session today of Humanity Rising as we complete a 5-day program on self-health empowerment. Over the last 4 days, we've traversed many aspects of practical exercises that we can all do simply and in a very short period of time that enhance our immune systems, deepen our emotional equilibrium, improve our mental acuity, and in general, increase our capacity to navigate increasing turbulence and complexity and chaos with an equanimity of spirit that allows us to both be alert, but also more calm. We've looked at coherence breathing. We've looked at evolutionary somatics and how to use the tarot card and dowsing. We've looked at biosonic healing techniques yesterday. It was an extraordinary session just to ponder how sound and vibration not only constitutes who we are, but how specific tones can bring mental health and physical rejuvenation just by opening ourselves to sound. And today we want to explore intention and visualization and how our mental facilities can enhance our overall health. And so I want to welcome my good friend and colleague, Deanna Rice, who has convened this program and other programs on Humanity Rising, who is a polarity practitioner, a hypnotherapist, an energy worker, a yoga teacher, a dancer, and who is passionate about empowering people in very simple ways, practical ways to take control of their health and lead abundant lives. So Deanna, thank you so much for all you've done, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's such an honor to be with this community as always. And I am so excited to share these two amazing women with the community today. We are going to delve into the mind, as Jim mentioned, and also the spirit, mind, body connection, that whole connection at a vertical axis that we can access all of us. And we're going to start with the practice, actually. Instead of some coherent breathing as we do normally, we're going to have Susan Shore-Femi come on and guide us in a little open focus meditation as a practice to open up the work today. And she is an amazing co-founder of Open Focus Meditation with her late great husband, Les Femi, the godfather of biofeedback, incredible connection for so many creative people, athletes, all different walks of life that have helped them open up and get connected more to what they do in the world, creatively and academically, just with the mind. And we're also going to be joined by Rachel Epstein, who is also, both of these amazing women helped their partners develop guided imagery. We call it mental imagery, from Dr. Jerry Epstein in New York City, that I was honored to be able to study with. And her focus on imagery work is ancient, goes back to the Mesopotamian area of the world. And I believe you enter into morphogenetic fields. So many human beings have done these exercises, and certainly a modern twist to them. So we're honored to have Rachel with us later on in the program. But right now I invite Susan to come on. And she's going to start us off with a practice and then go into some description of the work and more practice on the other end of her presentation. So welcome, Susan. I think you're muted. Let's get.
Yes, sorry.
There you go.
Yeah. I want to just start out with an exercise that I will explain later why it's so powerful. So just go along with the gag. And right now, because you're just settling in, you're probably more narrow focused than you need to be, and you're orienting yourself. And I'm going to ask you to begin to open up to an attention that's more inclusive, particularly inclusive of space, so that you're no longer narrow focused and revving up your autonomic nervous system. So I'm going to ask you to imagine certain things, which means just pretend, make it up, be effortless. Don't be worried about getting it right. And I'm going to bring you into your body just as a starter, so feeling the spaces can be helpful. And I'm just going to ask you to spend about 10 seconds between each question feeling what's going on in your body. So can you imagine, if you feel comfortable, closing your eyes? If not, keep your eyes nice and soft. And can you imagine feeling the presence of your fingers in your lap? Knowing your fingers are there because you feel them. And can you imagine that the fingers are filled with space or volume or emptiness, so that you're not only feeling fingers, but you're feeling the emptiness that fills them? And can you imagine that as you continue to do that, you can imagine the space all around your fingers? So you're feeling fingerness, the space that fills them, and the space that surrounds them. And can you imagine that that's a template for how to feel all the other spaces I want to just gradually take you through? So just as you feel your hands and fingers filled and surrounded by space, can you imagine feeling your whole bodies filled with space in the same way? Your head and your hands and your arms, legs and feet and torso, feeling their presence and imagining them filled and surrounded by space. As you continue to do that, can you imagine also feeling the space on either side of your body? So you're feeling the space inside and outside on either side. And can you imagine feeling the space in front of you and behind you? And above you and below you. So that you're feeling your whole body filled and surrounded by space on all sides. And can you imagine what it would be like to feel the space inside your body and outside your body as one continuous space? And imagine that this continuous space extends outward on all sides, as far as you can feel it without efforting. It might be a cocoon around your body, or it might extend beyond the room, beyond the universe, whatever you can feel without trying. And can you imagine feeling this space so palpably, so sensitively, that it's as if you're becoming space? And can you imagine bathing in this space as you would in a warm bath? All is space. And space is everywhere. It runs through everything. And we have all these senses through which to experience space. So just as we're feeling the space, can you imagine hearing the space? You call it silence. And visualizing the space. Even tasting and smelling the space. Even your mind has thoughts that arise out of space, out of emptiness. Can you imagine feeling the space in your mind as thoughts arise? And time flows through space, and you can be aware of that time's flow. And once again, space is already there. I'm not asking you to be with anything that doesn't already exist, and yet we ignore it. What would it be like to include all this space through all our senses? Even as we think about stuff and talk about stuff, that space can be home base. Very different experience than when we're excluding space. And I would ask you to play with this as the rest of the program proceeds. Thank you. I'm going to turn back the program to Dhyana.
I feel so much space. I can barely form my words. Thank you so much for that experience. As I was in the space, I was really hearing and sensing less, and his presence with this work, with all the sensory, kind of working together. And when you said visualize, I mean, that's what we're visualizing, when you start out space. But when you I saw so many spirals of blue light, and it was just so delicious.
Yes, thank you. The reason that Les began with feeling space is he wanted you to be in that sensory mode when it came to dissolving pain, because pain is a feeling sense, but it's really a multi-sensory awareness. words are so grounding and hard to describe this ephemeral feeling of space. But thank you, Dhyanna.
Yes, I want you to also include some of the explanation of his work with dissolving pain. And I know you had some input on that for your book, right?
Yes,
Dissolving
yes,
pain.
yes. Did you want me to do that now or?
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit
Oh,
about
okay.
that? Because so many people are in pain emotionally, physically, so
Yeah.
many issues right now.
Yeah. Well, the work of Les Femi is what informs all of this. And what I love about it is it came out of the science of his observing his brain waves and discovering what kind of conditions needed to be present in order for brain waves to move into the alpha range, which is a frequency of relaxed alertness, and most importantly, to begin to produce synchrony, where the whole brain is peaking and troughing in this alpha state at the same time. And that he experimented first on himself, and then when he was doing a postdoc at UCLA Brain Research Institute, and then went to New York for a professorship, and he continued with his students. And over, he discovered that producing these wonderful brainwaves are not produced by an act of will, and they're not produced by trying, and they're not produced by relaxing, by just relaxing your muscles. It was more subtle than that. And those of you who know the work know that his own work showed that the harder he tried, the less successful he was. And it wasn't until he gave up and was feeling despair that even in the despair, his brain waves moved into this desirable range. But what I think more informs the open focus technique is when he started to work with a lot of subjects who were students at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. And they had the same trouble he had, just trying to produce this. You can't try, but we don't know how not to try. Everything we've been trained to do is trying. And by a lot of experimentation and exposing people to various things, he discovered that as soon as someone imagines space in and around their body, suddenly those brain waves come into synchronous alpha. And the more palpably they merge with that space, the more that happens. So he asked the question, well, what diffuses and immerses? What opens up and immerses? And he realized there must be a behavior called how you pay attention, which isn't to what you pay attention, but how you pay attention. And it must be this attentional shift that brings about all these desirable results. And all of you know this. Right now, you probably forgot about space and you're narrow focusing on me. It's what we're trained to do. Well, what if you let me be at the center of your awareness and my thoughts and your thoughts and my words, and remember the space that you just came out of? It's a different attentional state. And it's what we do when we're truly merged with love, or we're at a concert and we're enormously transported, or or those of us who are artists, when the song is singing us or the dance is dancing us, we fall into this state when we're doing peak performance athletically, artistically. But Les always felt, why do we have to wait for this moment when we fall into it? Let's start bringing it about. So he combined what he developed into this open focus technique, which is bringing people into larger and larger spaces. And he did it along with neurofeedback, where he would be observing people's brainwaves just as he did his own and his students, and realizing that they're both expressions, one of the other, that how you pay attention is the behavioral correlate of what kind of brainwaves you're producing. And then he also discovered that when the brain stops feeling separate, not only are you diffused into space, but you recognize that you're more removed from your experience than you need to be. And what if you diffused in space and then merged with your whole experience? That has even more powerful impact and is particularly important when you're dealing with pain. You know, with pain, pain comes up and we want to split from it. And if we would just do what we do with happy feelings, you know, if something happy happens, you say, come and get me, come. As soon as something we don't like, we try to push it away. Well, the opposite is true. If you just open up and merge with the pain, it goes away. Phenomena disappear in the presence of all this space. And it also struck me, you know, the conference is about humanity, healing the body, for sure. Open focus does that. Alpha synchrony produces the reduction in autonomic over-arousal that leads to fight or flight and normalizes all the peripheral systems like the muscular, the vascular, the endocrine system, and makes us feel very different. And we know that to be true. But it also, the more we're in space, the more we have a sense of oneness, both in ourselves and between people. Love is a way of paying attention. You can't love if you're narrow and separate. You love when you merge. But isn't the problems of the world that we're separate? I mean, do you kill somebody you love? No, it's all this separateness. And I love open focus because all of you come from different traditions that say the same thing. I love that Les can validate everything you all think is true with what's happening in the brain. I think that's very cool. So that's the origins of open focus, and I'm proud to expand by talking about Les's work.
Yeah, beautiful. Can you talk a little bit more about synchronous alpha? What's actually happening?
Well, the synchrony is when two or more brain waves peak and trough at the same time. So when you have whole head synchrony, your brain waves are moving into alpha range and moving into more peaking and troughing at the same time, as opposed to asynchrony, which is the opposite. Now, the brain needs both to function properly, and asynchrony brings about narrow focus and separateness, which we need and we use daily. It's not a bad thing, but the overuse of that narrow focus and asynchronous activity is what makes us all stressed out. So learning how to spend some time in synchronous alpha means you're putting in the background the objective separate world of asynchrony, which has a lot of usefulness and will continue to use. And you're saying, let's make foreground this sense of oneness, the sense of everything being the same. And so it's the way the brain works. And this is a healthy brain does both. But we are trained in our culture to be narrow focused. Since you were a baby, you know, you were applauded for separating out what's me and what's mommy, what's me and what's the light, and naming the rattle. That we developed our separate asynchronous narrow focus to survive in this world, and then we get rewarded for it. So those of us who are interested in consciousness and oneness and merger are now saying, well, that's all fine and good and great, but let's add more to our toolbox. And Dehanna and I were talking about artists. I was telling her there's a woman named Ray Tattenbaum who's in Connecticut, and she teaches open focus to opera singers. And she once at a demonstration at a conference took an opera singer who was very good, who sang for this huge audience, and she was wonderful. Then Ray took her through an open focus exercise, then had her sing the same aria, and it was obvious to everybody how it was even better. then we all went to her workshop, and I have this screechy, terrible voice. And I have to say, I did a little bit better. And athletes do it. What as a dancer, I know, Deanna, you must know that it's when the dance does you, right?
Right. You become the dance as well as breathing. When you do the breath
Yeah.
practice, you become the breath.
Yes. And athletics too. I mean, I can't tell you how many athletes Les worked with who found that for obvious reasons, when you become more aware of an open focus state, which can include narrow at the center, but has space all around it rather than just excluding space, your muscles work better, your response times are faster, you're aware of where everybody is on the field, you're more intuitive. It's something I think all great performers in every field fall into. Runners talk about runner's high. What is that except that when you become the run? And it's so I find it very useful. And of course, we work with I think anxiety plagues us all. Anxiety, apprehension, nervousness, and patience, they're all the same thing, separateness. So I use it a lot. Being an anxious person by nature, I'm always manipulating when I'm feeling OCD or anxious. I immediately recognize I've lost space.
Right. Right. I know in your classes, which I loved doing them while Les was still with us,
Yes.
the exercise of the paintings
Yes.
and how when you look at a painting and then you use open focus to look
Yes.
at the painting.
Yes.
Can you explain what
Sure.
happens with that?
Les had an exercise where he used 40 of his sister's paintings. Her name is Emmy Ledbetter, and Ledbetter Art is where you can find them. And she would do paintings in acrylic that the foreground and the background of the painting was not always clear. So the figures would emerge from the background, and sometimes the periphery of the figures were background. And so he would run all 40 slides really fast, then take people through an eyes open focus, and then run the same slides again. And people reported the figures became more obvious, jumped out, the colors were brighter, the impact of the art on their sensibilities was greater, all by changing how you pay attention. And so it's great. But even now, you're all looking at me and talking and listening to me. You can manipulate your experience of me by simply manipulating your attention.
Right. When I'm looking at you on the screen, I'm starting to take in what's around the screen,
Yes.
the light that's on my face, and
Yes.
all of the aspects of, and somehow is it in parallel with quantum mechanics? Because you're
Well,
becoming observer,
yeah,
right?
I mean, I'm fascinated with quantum mechanics and love that the idea that the observer affects the observed, and certainly this is true. And in quantum mechanics, the de-emphasis on the material, how space and energy are really underpinning it, and that's the truth of reality. And we ignore it because our brains can't process everything. So we screen out a lot of the truth about the universe. And all we're asking is just spend a little time letting it in for a while. It's very normalizing physiologically. It calms down fight or flight, brings up the relaxation, and you can have a nice balance where you can do it all together. It's a highly functional state.
Which is alert and relaxed.
Yes.
So it's
not
together.
the deep meditation of theta where you go deep,
Right.
very deep. It's a more everyday functional state.
And it's so important for us to get that in our toolbox for inner peace, because this is the impetus of the whole week, is creating the tools for inner peace.
Yes.
and allowing that as a part of when you get anxiety and you're feeling anxious, to bring in space.
Yes.
Just, open it up and give yourself a moment. Can
Yes.
you guide us a little bit more in a practice?
Sure. How
Uh,
long would you like me to go?
well, how about 15 minutes and then we'll
Oh,
get Rachel on.
okay. So once again, if you could get comfortable, remember that this is not about trying. You get what you get. Whatever you get is good enough. And once more, can you close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or soften your eyes if you don't? And once again, go back to your fingers. We have more cells in the sensory motor cortex devoted to feeling your fingers than we do for our whole back. So it's a nice entry point. And so can you imagine, once again, feeling your thumbs and forefingers filled and surrounded by space? And can you imagine feeling the space between your thumbs and forefingers? Can you imagine feeling all your fingers filled and surrounded by space? And your hands. Can you imagine feeling your hands and arms filled and surrounded by space? And as you continue to do that, can you also add the feeling of your feet and toes filled with space? And your legs filled with space? So you're feeling your hands and arms, your feet and legs filled with space. And can you imagine feeling that space also in your lower torso, your belly and your buttocks and your internal organs filled with space? And your upper torso, your spine and your esophagus, your organs, all filled with space. Just as you're feeling your limbs and your lower torso. Can you imagine feeling your shoulders and trapezius muscles and neck filled with space? Can you imagine feeling the space that fills your scalp? And your ears and the space between your ears? Can you imagine feeling the space that fills your tongue and your lips and your gums and your throat, all filled with space? And your nose and nasal passages and cheeks filled with space. Can you imagine feeling your eyes and the distance between your eyes and the muscles around your eyes filled with space? And the space between your temples. And your forehead and eyebrows. So that you're feeling your whole head filled with space, the same space that fills your torso and your limbs and your shoulders. Everything is filled with space. And as you continue to feel into that space, once again, you're going to add the space on either side of you, in front of you and behind you, above you and below you. So that you're feeling the space inside and outside your body, and imagining it as one space, one three-dimensional space that fills everything without effort. And can you imagine bringing in any other senses that emerge? You can hear the space and see it without opening your eyes, and think it and taste it and smell it, and be aware of time. That space is always there, and we can experience it through all our senses. And when space becomes foreground, all the objects of our senses can exist in it. The sounds can punctuate the silence, and the body feelings can punctuate the feeling space. Tastes and smells can arise out of emptiness. Thoughts arise out of emptiness of mind. Present time punctuates the flow of time. And we can identify with both the ground and the object, instead of just narrowing on the object. Can you imagine, especially as you bathe in the space that, the feeling space that fills and surrounds you, can you take note of any body sensation that you might describe as unpleasant or unwanted? Or even wanted. I always work with the anxiety that I can find in my esophagus or throat. Another person might work with their back pain or their mind chatter, whatever sensation comes up, the chair against your back. And we're making the argument that these exist because we narrow focus on them and separate from them. What if we were to do the opposite? That as you bathe and bask in all this global space, that you can also feel this sensation, maybe this pain, this sensation, as also filled and surrounded by space, as a cloud of particles filled and permeated by space. The same space that fills and surrounds you. And from this vantage point, as you bathe in space, can you imagine identifying where you, the feeler, is in relationship to this sensation? Are you above it or below it, to the side? And imagine what it would be like to float into the very center of the sensation, merging in it, just like you would merge with a taste that you love. You would just want more of it, become more of it. Can you imagine doing that with the sensation, even if it feels painful? And you're doing that while you're still resting in all this global space. And you may notice that the more you immerse yourself in global space inside and out, and the more you merge with the space in that sensation and in global space, what happens is the sensation starts to diffuse into the surrounding space, like ink and water. So diffusing and immersing into space and pain and sensation dissolves it. And since we're all very, we have preferences about language, there are many synonyms for that. Can you be with the sensation? Can you melt into the sensation? Can you have the sensation wash over you? Can you bathe in it, which is my favorite? Can you feel it more? Can you become one with it? They all mean the same thing. And you're doing that even as you do the same thing with all the space that fills and surrounds you. So we're moving our attention from a narrow, objective attention to one that's more diffuse and immersed. I remember once at a workshop, a man had heard this exercise Les was taking them through, and he said, can you merge? Can you melt? Can you become one with the pain? Can you allow it to flow through you? Can you feel it more? Can you love it? And from the back of the room, this guy said, love it. Why didn't you say that in the first place? We're fussy about language, but when we love, we're not separate and narrow. We merge. So that's what open focus is just how to diffuse and emerge into everything, which also includes space.
Beautiful.
We ignore it. Thank you.
Beautiful. I really appreciate that practice. Wow.
Me too.
The books are Dissolving Pain, which is an amazing book, and Open Focus Brain.
Yes.
These two are gems. So
Yes,
I encourage
thank you.
people to go on your site. And I'm going to bring in Rachel now, another delicious practice. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you, Deanna.
And I'll bring you back at 15 after the hour
Okay.
for some Q&A. So welcome, Rachel.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
It's so nice to see you. Yeah.
And so many interconnections with imagery, and it was delightful.
Yeah, and I just want to bring it to everyone's attention, your book, Reversing the Trauma of War. Wonderful book, really so potent and so important. So I turn it over to you, explaining the work and then some practice, and I'll come back. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm trying to make a couple of connections between what Suzanne brought to our attention and mental imagery, and a couple of things struck me that really came to the forefront. So the things this whole week, as I was explained to me, was about practices of inner peace. And when I think about inner peace, I'm thinking about, hopefully in an open, focused way, without making conclusions, because conclusions is a closed focus system. So even when we're doing imagery or we're doing even rational thinking, we always want to be in this sort of open space without creating conclusions about things. So when we're presented with new things, of course, we can keep an open mind about it. And let go of our conditioned self of pre-evaluating, prejudging. So when I was thinking about this inner space and inner peace, what occurred to me in my work with people who have trauma and stress is how they differ. Because, and Suzanne is very concerned with space. And in imagery, we're concerned with space, but also in some ways with time. So in both systems, we're coming back into the moment without being, without rushing into the future, nor rushing back into the past, or making up pictures about how things are supposed to be versus how they are. So I think in that way, the open focus and the mental imagery work together to support each other. So while Suzanne focused on space, I want to think about time for a moment together. So when we're stressed, most of our stress is about the future or about time, how we don't have enough time to finish something, what is going to be in the next moment that is going to not be how we want it to be, how it ought to be. So that's a lot of what our stress is about. So when we use mental imagery, before we even get to the mental imagery point of view, we need to become aware that we are making up a story about the future when we're stressed out, about what's going to be, about how it isn't perfect. And we have this, this imaginal closed system, you can call it asynchronous, about what ought to be, which is the ideal, and what actually we're experiencing right at this moment. So the first thing is for us, just like an open focus, we become sort of watchers and take note of our sensations and our feeling space. So in imagery, we're also beginning, when we're dealing with stress, to become a watcher. So we want to go and notice when we jump into this future talk about how things are supposed to be. So that's the first state. So whenever you find yourself getting anxious, which is, Susan said, very common, it's probably under the base of almost everything that most things that we're experiencing in our culture is a form of fear and anxiety. And usually, again, it's about either something's not right in this moment or it's about the future. So So the first thing for us is to become aware of this future talk that's going on all the time. And to bring ourselves back into the moment, we can use, first of all, the recognition that there's no emergency going on, because when we start getting distressed, we have this concurrent thought that's hardwired almost into us that there's an emergency that has to be addressed. But most of the things that we encounter in life are not emergencies. We're sitting and watching TV and life, and we see some pictures of war, and we start going into what I call a mini emergency space. Or we speak to our friend who makes a suggestion to us about how things are supposed to be and how they're not like this, and we get into a slight emergency state about what's going to be. We start thinking about tomorrow and how it is too packed of a day. We're constantly having these mini emergencies. So we want to become aware of it and cognitively to ask ourselves, is this an emergency, or is this just something that might be urgent or needs to be taken care of, or it's just another story? Because in my way of thinking about the world, the future doesn't exist. What we have is this present moment, present moment, present moment, present moment. And there is no future. It's a potential that hasn't come into fruition yet. And let's go back now and talk about the past. The past doesn't exist either. It is also a time, it's dead, buried, and gone. We can't retrieve the past. All we have is memories that may be lodged somatically in us, but they don't exist anymore in the objective world. So for me, stress is usually about the future, and trauma is going back to the past because we are being constantly reminded in our bodies, in our feelings, our thoughts, that the past is now existing. That's what happened with trauma people, right? In war trauma, there's a hypervigilance that's chronic, that's always that war veterans are carrying around with them, that there's an emergency going on at any moment, and they're unsafe. And therefore, they're responding with their past conditioning that's now sort of almost hardwired in them to a current event that doesn't warrant it. So there's a lot of explosive anger with trauma people. There could be a lot of fear. There's anxiety, lots of different feelings because they're in a hypervigilant state of emergency. So, so what I wanted to do was do a few exercises now about imagery and just tell you just a few minutes about imagery. Imagery is the mind thinking in pictures. So it's all of our, we say pictures, but it's actually us turning in the way that I've conceived of it. All of our senses are turned inward to explore that inner subjective reality. And in a way, it's congruent with turning our senses so outward that we're no longer bound by sort of objective, what we think is objective reality and our own boundedness in space, and we're expanding. So whether you're doing open focus and expanding outward in space, or you're finding your inner space, we're exploring different dimensions of space and time and consciousness. So in imagery, we just do a very brief relaxation with our breath to turn our senses inward and to come back into this moment and to come into contact with, let's call it our inner self. So what I wanted to do was first do one imagery for isolation, because again, it ties in nicely with Suzanne's work, because we mostly consider ourselves as isolated. We have isolated consciousness, we're disconnected, etc. So everyone, let's just close our eyes and come into a relaxed state. You can have your hands in your lap or your hands in the arms of the chair. And we're turning our senses inward, and we're doing this by closing our eyes and sitting up in a relaxed but fairly straight manner, if it's possible. If you're in bed, that's okay too. And you're breathing out 3 times slowly. So what I mean by breathing out 3 times slowly is that we're taking long, slow exhalations through the mouth and normal inhalations through the nose. And of course, if you can't breathe through your nose, then just breathe through your mouth, it's fine. And we're coming into a relaxed state. And we're turning our senses inward to make new discoveries. So on your next exhalation, imagine that you're wrapped in a silk cocoon and sense the walls surrounding you. And the cocoon is keeping you safe while you grow and transform. And breathe out one time. And feel your arms growing very, very long. And as you stretch your limbs, sense the cocoon is thinning until you push through the walls of the cocoon, breaking through into the light of the sun. And then step out of the cocoon, knowing that you're free. And now look all around you and see what you discover. And then breathe out and open your eyes. So that's an imagery that we could use whenever we're feeling isolated or contracted in ourselves, where we're not feeling safe, and we can stay in the cocoon, and we can also have the opportunity to get out of the cocoon and know that things are safe around us. And you may notice that you discovered things when you got out of the cocoon. There may have been a new terrain, and if we were doing a longer exercise, we could go and explore that new path or terrain for yourself. Because what we're doing when we do imagery is we're making discoveries about our inner life and how that inner life is a reflection of our outer life as well. Because our inner life and our outer life are mirroring each other in this work. So what we conceive of in our inner life can manifest in what we're calling the objective reality. Now, I want to do another imagery exercise because it also seems to me to tie into what Suzanne was talking about, which you could use for isolation, but I think it's also about acceptance of self and of others. And it works more on our feeling states, because what we do is that we are constantly judging ourselves and others. And just like in the open focus, we come to a place where we're more diffuse and those boundaries are disappearing and we're less judgmental. So we're accepting the pain as it is we're experiencing in our lives. So we can also do that with all sorts of feelings that arise in us. So this is another imagery exercise. It's based on a Rumi poem. You know, Rumi was a mystic in the Sufi tradition that lived, 800 years ago. And he wrote a poem about the guest house that was translated, I think, by Coleman Barks. So using that as a basis, we're going to go and see just how we can come through imagery to a level of acceptance of ourselves and others. So everyone, close your eyes. And breathe out 3 times slowly. Again, these long, slow exhalations through the mouth and normal inhalations through the nose, turning into ourselves and calming ourselves so that we can focus inwardly. And on your next exhalation, see, sense, and feel yourself as a guest house. With every morning, a new guest arriving on your doorstep. And breathe out 1 time. And feel joy knocking at your door. And breathe out 1 time. And feel sadness as it creeps in. And breathe out one time. And sense how anger abruptly takes over. And breathe out one time. And become aware of how these feelings come and go, arise and disappear. And breathe out one time. And greet these guests with laughter, no matter who they may be. Dark thoughts, shame, malice. Know they're only passing through the front door and exiting through the back door, if you let them. And breathe out and open your eyes. So I've given you 2 imagery exercises, and you can see how malleable they are, and how you can use them. We can use our imagination to see how we call forth, how we let things in and how we let things out of ourselves. And that we have that ability to both merge with things and separate with them. So it's, in a sense, we're coming into a nice synchrony where we're both synchronous and can let go of things and be asynchronous as well, right? So I think we had another, I just want to give you another simple imagery exercise that really only takes a moment and is very, very quick. And it's called the Emerald Dome. And you can use it for whenever you're feeling anxious or distressed about things. And it's very, very simple. And it uses color to help us move along and process and accept our feeling states. And first we accept things, and then we have the possibility of letting them go or expanding beyond them if we're using an open focus way of thinking about it. So everyone close your eyes and breathe out 3 times slowly. Long, slow exhalations through the mouth and normal inhalations through the nose. Now see yourself enclosed in an emerald dome. And see the glow of the emerald dome diffusing around you and filling you with its radiant light. And breathe out one time. And sense and feel this calming light protecting and shielding you from any disturbing feelings, thoughts, or sensations. And breathe out and open your eyes. So when you're feeling distressed, you don't have to do a big imagery. You can just imagine that you're surrounded by this emerald dome. And over time, as you repeat this imagery, whenever the anxiety shows up, or if you can use this before going to sleep, or you can practice it right in the morning, every morning, to set your day aright, you'll find that just the image itself brings on the physiological changes of feeling calmed now. So, Deanna, why don't you tell me how much time we have left?
It looks like 10 minutes.
Okay, so we have plenty of time. Yeah. Do you want to?
I'd like to come in and ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
I love the exercise. I mean, the Emerald Dome, that was really so palpable. I really felt sense. And I just wanted to kind of go into a little bit about your work with trauma in your book. because there's so many great exercises in there for reversing the effects of trauma and the war and the peace movement. And I just wanted to expound a little bit on that, Rachel, if you could.
Sure. So this just a little bit of how I came to write this book, because I wasn't hadn't been focused on war veterans, but as it happened, my husband, who really taught me this work, just as Suzanne learned from Les, I learned from my husband Jerry, and he was a war. He had been in the war. He was actually one of the last people inducted into the Vietnam War, and he was drafted at the age of 34. He was already a doctor. And he came in and he was at a hospital in Pennsylvania, and he would see all these trauma victims coming through, you know, all these victims of war. And at that point, there was very little to do, and he didn't know about mental imagery. Later, he learned about imagery and its possibility for healing. And he had a student who actually worked with war veterans in, I think it's called the Vet Center, which is meaning it was for mental issues, because they always in the Army, they always separate out physical from mental. They haven't quite merged it yet, although I think it's changing somewhat. They've made a great effort to try and reconnect our physiology and our emotional and thinking states. So in any case, she worked with the vets, and together we came up with this book. Her name is Phyllis Kahaney, the co-author of the book called Reversing the Trauma of War. So about trauma, so first, a couple of things. The book really isn't just addressed to war veterans. It's really addressed as a way of dealing with the stressors that we meet up with every day in life. So there's imagery for anxiety, just the scope of how imagery is used. You can use it for anxiety, for pain, for wanting to obtain something for yourself, for physical healing. You can use it for anxiety, for addictions. There's no end. And for healing social relationships with people, right? Because a lot of veterans, as all of us, have a lot of difficulty with their personal relationships when they come back, because they're still in this traumatized state, and war is all over, and it becomes difficult for them to readjust into civilian life, where there aren't snipers. Mostly, we're not encountering snipers every time we turn a corner. But a veteran is really often experiencing a lot of that, and sometimes they're not aware of it. It's really quite things that happen to them. These triggers can happen even after many years of seemingly an adjusted life. So there was a story in the book about how someone was at an airport. I think he had been a Vietnam vet. And all of a sudden there was a noise, and he leapt to the ground, right? And he hadn't done that in years and years. But there was some sort of trigger. Probably there was extra stressors in his life at that time. And he had this automatic response that was still built into him, even though the war had been completed, 30, 40 years ago for him. And of course, it's very disarming, to people to have these feelings keep on coming up. So, there's a lot of different ways of managing trauma. And this book is really, you can go psychoactive things, there's physical, there's drugs, there's the somatic ways of doing it, there's EMDR, etc., many, many ways. And this is a way that people can engage with trauma or with stress by handling what's going on with them in their everyday life. So we're not asking you to go in and delve deep into a traumatic event. Instead, because imagery is holographic, you can deal with one small item and it can have a reverberation in all of your life. So for example, a war vet wanted to be able to go to church, because for veterans, going out into open spaces with a lot of people or in closed spaces with a lot of people does not feel safe, right? Because there could be a sniper at the door. They have to look at where the exit is. They have to plan it out. And so Phyllis worked with a vet to both work on a rational basis to how to go and plan for going to church, because he wanted to go back to church, so that he knew that he would go in right after everybody was seated. He'd go in at the back and sit at a back pew so it felt comfortable. And at the same time, he worked imaginally to see himself in that situation. So living it out in the moment of now in a safe way. And he indeed was able to start going to church, which of course, if he's able to go to church now and be in a safe situation with a lot of people, that's going to have a spillover effect all over the place. So he may find that he can drive now more safely without being concerned. This is particularly true of all the later wars where people were in tanks and stuff, and they're driving convoys. They feel very unsafe being in public highways. And when they feel, so they'll speed, or they will try to separate themselves, or they might not go out until it's safe at night and it's dark and there aren't a lot of cars out. There's many ways to respond to this feeling of having enemies, driving past you at any moment. So there could be a spillover effect where he now feels comfortable in himself being not only in church, but also in driving situations. So that's that spillover effect that imagery has, just like there's a spillover effect of being in an open focus space. You can always use your imagination to access this subjective reality, which is really informing how we're feeling, thinking, and believing. So instead of working just on our feelings and our sensations and our thoughts, we're working in this imaginal realm where everything comes together and coheses.
Right. And also, can you just touch on discovery and imagery work for my own experience as well as with clients? It's discovering something, in that realm of imaginal realm.
We're always making discoveries, because just as in Suzanne's world, Susan, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Susan, when she speaks about us discovering space outside of ourselves, so in the imaginal realm, we're also making discoveries. And we are, as I said, we're turning our senses inward, and we're making discoveries about what we're looking at, what we're finding. So some people are making discoveries about, when they're doing imagery exercise, about some deep memory. Other people are making discoveries of finding that their consciousness is quite expanded. And they're connecting with the invisible realm, with what we might call the divine realm, the one mind, etc. So if we think about, if we go back to the Bible, and Ezekiel has a vision, and what does he discover when he has his vision? When he goes into that imaginal realm, he discovers that he's in front of the throne of God, right? So he had like a big discovery, right? Most of us are not seeing ourselves at the throne of God. And what does he discover when who is sitting on that throne? Well, what he discovers is that it's a man. And it's and so what we're discovering is that we are reflections of God. So we're always discovering that we have this creative capacity within us to shift our reality. So that's where it's quite transformative. And there are short imagery exercises, and then there's these called waking dream, or very long imaginal expeditions that you're going.
Right.
With.
Yeah,
right?
Waking Dream. What a great, amazing philosophy and therapy and book. Can you just talk about the East Coast, West Coast before we bring Susan back and,
sure.
Jim?
So another imagery teacher, this is hearsay, I didn't hear it myself, mentioned in some that this type of imagery that Jerry Epstein teaches, that was my husband, and he learned it from his teacher, who was an Algerian Jew who moved to Jerusalem, named Colette Abouker Muscat. So this was from this teacher's point of view, an East Coast modality. That is, it was quick. You go in and out, and you don't spend a lot of time having very long inductions and other types of, and the imagery. And the reason why we do it quickly is because your images, by their very nature, are ephemeral. They stand between the invisible realm, the subjective realm, the realm of the divine, the realm of expanded consciousness, and our everyday reality. And they're very quick. So it's not that I don't want you to take time to see and experience what you're experiencing, but you don't want to linger in it, because if you linger, what happens is that that transmission, which in this, my worldview, is coming from other realms, other consciousness into our heart, into the brain, the right brain, then to the left brain starts chatting. And we start, getting off focus, and we start thinking about our dinner, right? And we don't stay in the moment. So we don't need a lot of time to connect. It's really because we're going into a timeless zone. The image is a timeless zone. And in a sense, it's the same timeless and spaceless zone that Susan is going into.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. I want to invite Susan back and Jim for any comments. Thank you so much. The comparison or the compatibility of both of these awarenesses are really extraordinary, really beautiful.
Rachel, could you say more about the holographic nature of visualizing? That it fascinates me as we learn more in physics about the holographic nature of the universe.
Right. So the part in imagery, the part contains the whole, right? So you just need that little one thing and it will have a reverberation. And it came out of, in waking dream therapy, my husband has a whole discussion, and actually I have a YouTube up on it as well, about how you can take how the hologram came to be, where they use different lenses, and a slice of an apple is sort of how I remember it, can recreate the whole, just as our DNA is a recreation, in a single cell where we can recreate a whole being. So we're always looking for seeing everything in its wholeness, and the image is whole, while as rational thinking is cause and effect, and it's linear and it's breaking things down. The image is a hologram. It tells you many, many aspects, right? That's why a picture is worth 1,000 words. So the only other thing I wanted to say is that just as in your work, you're always looking for wholeness, so in the imaginal realm, we're also coming together out of fragmentation into a unitive experience, first of self, then of a community, and then of Gaia, and then into a more cosmic consciousness of whatever we're going to call the divine. Beautiful. So we're also going into those realms of being.
Hannah, how would you integrate breathing into all of that? How does it do?
Well, the universal breath. I mean, that's the cosmic breath. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is constantly happening as physicists talk about our universe expanding and contracting. And so we're doing that with our breath. And when I did that imagery exercise for you, Rachel, I found the center. It was like everything was kind of moving into my center, like lots of information that I wasn't even able to process. It was just the image, right? The hologram. So there's like these chunks of information, that maybe in my dream state, I'll be able to, unwind or understand. But it's a fascinating, both of the techniques together are just like their husband and wife, a marriage.
Yeah, they really are. It was really interesting to me. When I was younger, I took a very intensive Vipassana course, and it really shifted. And the Vipassana wasn't, there's many forms of Vipassana meditation and Buddhist meditation. This one came from, I think, Burma, and it was I think it was called not Insight. It was by a man named Goenka. He was the one who popularized it in the West and in India. And what you would do is scan your body, and you'd scan your body. And it occurred to me that I didn't stay with this practice, but it really was an open focus practice. Right. So instead, but we did it for a very long time. We did it for like 16 hours a day with just little breaks. But it was really interesting. And the other point about breathing is that in all this work, it's that we want to come back into the rhythm of life, of being the respiration of the in-breath and the out-breath. And even imagery is always regulating these rhythms of our life, because that's what we're really interested in reconnecting, which I think works really nicely with open focus. It's another way of reconnecting in a very deep way. A more sort of, it's a mixture of sort of imagery and a little more somatically oriented.
Beautiful. Jim, welcome back.
Yes, I've been marveling too, Deanna, at the beautiful complementarity between the open focus and the imaginal realms. And, I do a lot of work with Joe Dispenza, and, he talks about the void. And he emphasizes this open focus as sort of the container for everything.
Yeah.
Whether it's our intention, whether it's our elevated emotions, that the healing and the internal processes of cleansing are enhanced by beginning with the void, beginning with the open focus. And so I just want to thank you, Susan, for bringing all that in. And then
when Joe talks about open focus, he always cites Les's experience where he couldn't change his brainwaves and then gave up in despair and stopped trying. Yeah.
He tells that story very, very often.
Yeah.
It's that complete surrender
Yeah.
that triggers it in a really a mysterious way. But it's something that I've been practicing since I began with Dispenza, and find that it's more and more of the container you want to hold for whatever else you're trying to do. It just makes it more acute. And Rachel, as someone's steeped in Jungian depth psychology, the power of imaging, and would love to hear you say a little bit more about the therapeutic power of, in his case, almost like a free associational imaging that just allows these images to come out of your unconscious, and they seem innocuous, but they have a powerful therapeutic impact on the psyche.
Right. I think.
How do you understand that, and how would you amplify this notion?
So I think that when you think about imagination, you're thinking about different levels of connection. So people can use, so on the simplest, we're thinking about visualization and using it very, very actively, where we're almost conjuring up the memory to help us along. And then there are deeper realms where you're either going down into depth of self, and you're making these deep discoveries, and you can do it through these longer imaginal processes. Although sometimes it can just happen, with, depending on the person, with just a very simple imagery, or you're going to use it, or you can go and ascend, right? And in any case, you're exploring your inner space, which is really, there's no difference between inner space and, let's say, the space that Susan is trying to get us in contact with, the container. But in imagery, so I think that when Jung went down, he allowed himself that possibility of exploration, and he tapped into his own inner story, as well as to the storyline, these mythic stories that humans share in common with each other.
Right.
So, I think of, his red book.
Right, I
just
haven't
full
seen
of just images that just were erupting out of his unconscious.
Right, that he didn't really need, and just the fact that they came out was enough. He didn't really need to explain them. They would unfold their meaning to him as he went on. Right, so he wrote them out and allowed them to sit in his consciousness without having to make up a story of what they might mean. Because we always want to apply, we need story, but at the same time, we don't want to be bound by the story. So he really had, I don't know, I know some people think he had a breakdown, but we like to think of it, of course, that he had a breakthrough.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
and the two, it can sometimes, in an individual of great genius, be simultaneous.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that enhances the power. Stan Groff talks about that, how the real redemption is when the breakdown and the breakthrough happen simultaneously.
Right, exactly. Right. If they
Which
have,
I think globally it's happening for everybody with the pandemic and
Yeah.
the climate change and everything at critical mass. We're kind of
Yeah.
doing that together. We're breaking through
Yes.
because of our breakdown.
And then, Susan, I had just wanted to explore more your understanding of the relationship between the open space, the void where nothing exists because everything exists, and the specificity of one focus. How do you understand the relationship between those, and how do the two mutually inform one another? Because it's that combination that gives the power to the focus,
Yes.
whether it's imaging or any elevated intent or emotions and so forth. How do you understand that interconnection?
Well, that was important to Les, Jim, that we not throw the specificity or the narrow objective focus out with the bathwater, that he concentrated first on diffusing and immersing because he knew we were very good at narrow and objectifying. But if you look at his model of attention, which is what open focus is, it's an attention training technique that says once you learn all the dimensions, the diffusion, the separateness and immersion, the narrowness, the intuitiveness, the objectivity, that in an ideal open focus state, you want to combine them all so that you would want to, as you are attending to me and your thoughts about what I'm saying and your visual and whatever else, that you can be in this space and also have it at the center, a narrow intuitiveness. And that's ideal. That's where if we really want to perfect open focus and not just use it as an exercise, can you imagine doing that as you go about your business? So he didn't see attention as this or that. It was this and this and this.
Exactly.
And this.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Anybody working with sound? I mean, I've been coming, like we're all talking about visualizing, breathing, feeling, seeing. What is sound?
Yeah, yesterday we did sound healing with John Beaulieu.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you explain that, I see the I Ching symbol, with the dot on one side and and it seems like the cosmology of life.
Yes.
Really.
Yes.
Susan,
can you? Go ahead, Rachel.
I'm just going to ask, can you explain how you think about attention deficit? Because there's I just read there's an Adderall shortage. You may have a lot of customers.
Well, if you look at the brainwave studies on ADD, you'll find that there's a surplus of theta waves, which are the sleepy waves, the slower waves right below alpha that include daydreaming, and that they think that the inattentive states are when people succumb to that sort of spaciness, and the hyperactive states are when people try to plow through and then narrow focus too much. So the standard neurofeedback protocol is to reduce theta, reduce high beta, which is narrow focus, increase alpha or the mid-range frequencies, which are more functional. So that would be a neurofeedback protocol. fits, it parallels what we do with attention, that we're not saying this is all that is. We're
Right.
saying it's all present once. And it also makes people more stable. When we work with ADD kids, they can focus better when they can find the neurology of relaxed alertness, which is that state of openness and narrowness.
Right.
Yeah, I just
You-
wanted to say that as I was listening to you talk, and I was thinking, it is because you spend so much time in sensing what's going on in the body, right? Sensing that there's space along with whatever else we're experiencing, that it must be also effective also with trauma people, even if they haven't gone back through the traumatic events and reversed them, that it really is a core of a lot of the somatic ways of dealing with trauma.
I would think so too. I mean, this is not something that I'm real expert in, but if you look at like the EMDR protocol, what is it that we're doing when we reach the point of taking a fragment of the trauma and relaxing with it or getting used to it? I suspect that it would combine just really beautifully.
Can you both join the after chat?
Sure.
Right.
How
Okay,
do we
so
do that?
yeah, it's just an ending here, and there should be the chat link and the
Just
link
put
in the chat.
You
Uh-huh.
also received it in the email you got from Katie Amrin
Oh, okay.
with the Zoom link.
Should I just
so
click on that?
you just click on that and that will take you there.
I can't
so that-
join today, but thank you both so much. It seems like you need to dialogue more.
Thank you.
right, we
Thank
had
you,
fun.
Dehanna, for putting this all together. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my honor to see you, Susan and Rachel. I love
It's good
your
to
work.
see you too, and to do this is wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, my honor
Yes.
and pleasure.
Are we just answering the chats? Is that, or there's a new
No,
place?
it's a new Zoom room. It's an after chat Zoom
Yeah, and
room
you'll see
in the chat.
a chat in the chat box, Rachel. It says stand for the chat people. You can join the after chat here. He's put it in again. So just click
Okay.
on that now and you'll go.
Okay.
That brings us to a close, everyone.
Thank you.
Brilliant 5-day program. Deanna, you knocked it out of the park. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. And Susan and Rachel, you've been the perfect grand finale.
Thank you.
It's all the void, everyone. And out of the void, all things emerge, and the imaginal realm rules supreme. It's just beautiful the way you brought this whole thing to a close. So thank you all so much. We'll see you all on Monday, everyone, for another 5-day program with Connie Zweig on the process of maturation and aging and how we grapple with the shadow differently as we age. That's a 5-day program with Connie Zweig, a Jungian analyst, starting Monday.
Wonderful. You all have a great weekend. Take care.